Welcome back to the Explainer. If you've ever listened in on air traffic control audio or maybe glanced over a pilot's flight manual, you probably felt like you were listening to an entirely foreign language. It's just this rapid-fire world of acronyms, abbreviations, and coded jargon. But this isn't just some shorthand to save a few seconds on the radio. It's actually a hyper-precise, globally standardized legal framework, and it's designed to keep millions of people safe in the sky every single day. Okay, let's dive into this fascinating hidden language and see exactly how it works. Just look at this for a second. This is literally just a single page. Actually, scratch that. It's just the beginning of the letter A from the aviation law course syllabus. It is an absolute wall of acronyms. I mean, looking at this daunting glossary, it's kind of easy to joke that pilots speak entirely in tongues, right? It looks like someone just fell asleep on their keyboard. But behind this intimidating list is a very deliberate system. Our mission today is to decode this alphabet soup. And don't worry, we are definitely not going to just sit here and read an A to Z list together. That would put us all to sleep for sure. So here's a quick look at today's agenda. We'll start with the aviation law rulebook, then decoding the alphabet soup, moving right into measuring the skies, asking who is in control, and finally wrapping up with information and investigation. All right, Section 1, the aviation law rulebook. Right, so before we can even begin to decode these specific abbreviations, we really have to understand the foundational legal framework that makes all these standardized terms absolutely mandatory. As our source material lays out pretty clearly here, the main reference document is JAR OPS 1, and it draws other material from various ICAO documents. So what does this actually tell us? Well, it tells us that aviation is inherently international. If a pilot is taking off from Tokyo and landing in London, they have to operate under a universally understood set of rules. Organizations like ICAO ensure this global standardization happens. This legal foundation is exactly why pilots have to master this universal coded language. I mean, there is absolutely zero room for translation errors when you're flying a metal tube at 500 miles per hour. Let's move on to Section 2, decoding the alphabet soup. Now we can transition from that broad legal framework down to the specific day-to-day codes that pilots actually use in the cockpit. Now what's really interesting about this is the sheer density of the language. When you compare the high-level view of the syllabus introduction with the micro-level definitions of these abbreviations, you quickly realize just how absolutely critical precision is here. Changing just a single letter completely alters the legal meaning. For example, look at AIS versus AIC. One is a service, the other is a circular. Or take AAL versus AGL. If a pilot mixes those up, they're suddenly operating on completely different assumptions about the reality right outside their window. Let's explore exactly what that means in practice. Which brings us perfectly into Section 3, measuring the skies. This is our first real thematic cluster, and we're going to look at the incredibly precise and honestly quite varied ways that pilots and controllers talk about altitude. Because if you ask a pilot, hey, how high up are we? The answer is actually entirely relative. There are 3 distinct codes just for altitude. First, we have AAL, which is above aerodrome level. That just means how high you are relative to the specific airport you're trying to land at. Then there's AGL, above ground level, how high you are over the specific terrain immediately beneath the plane. And finally, AMSL, above mean sea level, your absolute altitude relative to the world's oceans. The vital differences here really can't be overstated. If a pilot is reading a chart showing a mountain peak at 5,000 feet AMSL, but their altimeter is mistakenly set to show 5,000 feet AGL, well, the results could be catastrophic. That precision between ground level, aerodrome level, and sea level is literally what keeps airplanes from hitting the ground. And, because measuring altitude relies so heavily on barometric pressure, which obviously changes depending on the weather and your location, aviation law relies on something called the ASR, or altimeter setting region. By dividing the sky up into specific geographic areas, authorities can ensure that every single aircraft flying in that specific region calibrates its altimeter to the exact same standard pressure setting. It basically ensures everyone's instruments are singing from the exact same sheet of music. Next up, Section 4. Who is in control? So, transitioning from measuring the physical sky, let's explore the complex hierarchy of the people who actually manage the traffic within it. When most of us think of who guides airplanes, we just immediately think of ATC, air traffic control, right? But looking a bit deeper, this builds into a much more specialized network. ATC is really just an umbrella term. Underneath that, you have the ATCC, the Air Traffic Control Center, which manages massive, broad regions of airspace. Then you have the ATCU, the Air Traffic Control Unit, which focuses on localized control. And finally, the ATCRU, the Air Traffic Control Radar Unit, which specifically handles radar-based guidance. It's a deeply layered network of specialized units that seamlessly passes an aircraft from one jurisdiction to the very next. But here is an interesting caveat. Not all airspace is under total, strict control. Sometimes pilots fly in areas where ATC doesn't tell them exactly what to do, but instead gives them some incredibly strong recommendations. Just look at these advisory acronyms: ADA for Advisory Airspace, ADR for Advisory Route, and ATAS for Air Traffic Advisory Service. This grouping really highlights that aviation law has created this nuanced spectrum of guidance. In these less restricted areas, pilots still receive vital traffic information and advice to maintain safety, without necessarily being under positive, mandatory control. And our final section, Section 5, Information and Investigation. Let's explore how pilots actually gather all their crucial flight data before they ever leave the ground, and what regulatory body steps in when things go wrong. A massive amount of data has to be processed before takeoff, and there is a multi-tiered system entirely dedicated to doing just that. The AIS, or Aeronautical Information Service, manages the data. They publish the AIP, the Aeronautical Information Publication, which acts as the core manual for flying in a given country. For temporary updates, they'll issue an AIC, an Aeronautical Information Circular, and then at the local airport level, you might rely on AFIS, the Aerodrome Flight Information Service. Grouping these together shows us the incredibly comprehensive, multi-tiered system used to distribute vital safety, weather, and navigational data to flight crews all over the world. But information isn't just a one-way street from the ground up to the sky. And this brilliantly illustrates the collaborative nature of aviation law. Take a look at ARERP, Air Report. Pilots don't just passively receive information, they actively report real-time observed conditions like severe turbulence or unexpected icing directly back to the ground via an ARERP. This effectively turns every single aircraft into a real-time weather and safety sensor for the entire global network. So, what happens when the systems, the altimeters, or the communications fail? We look to the AAIB, the Air Accident Investigation Board. So the crucial point is that this entity serves as the ultimate safety backstop. They investigate incidents and accidents not to point fingers, but to figure out exactly why something happened. Their findings are then used to update the very acronyms, rules, and procedures we've been discussing today. It creates this amazing continuous loop of safety improvement. So wrap your head around this for a second. We've taken just one page of a syllabus, literally just a portion of the letter A, and we've uncovered this intricate web of altitude measurements, radar hierarchies, and critical information networks. The complexity we just decoded is immense, yet it's something pilots and controllers navigate flawlessly every single day. But here's something to really think about. If all of this legal and operational framework is contained just within the letter A, how vastly complex is the full language keeping our skies safe, from B all the way to Z? Next time you look up and see a plane, remember, they aren't just flying, they're communicating in a high-stakes, invisible code. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep your curiosity flying high.